Okay, so fair warning about this movie. There is a very, 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 very graphic scene in this movie. And I think before going into it, you should prepare yourself for the fact that there is a very, very graphic scene in this movie. I don't want to say when it happens, I don't want to tell you what exactly entails, but just keep in mind, you don't want little kids seeing this movie because of this one scene, and if you are for the faint of heart, you're probably not going to want to watch this movie just for this one scene. So, with that being said, how was Weapons? It surprised me. So let's get into it.
But Mrs. Gandy's room was totally empty. And you know why? Because the night before, at 2:17 in the morning, every kid woke up, got out of bed, walked downstairs, and into the dark. And they never came back.
Okay, so Weapons is a movie that kind of had me hooked from the beginning when the first trailer came out. And that's because the marketing campaign to this movie was just so fantastic. And it kind of reminded me of a movie that came out last year called Long Legs. And the marketing campaign to that movie was fantastic as well. But as amazing as that marketing campaign was, you can watch my review on that movie. I did not like that movie. I had a lot of issues with it. I thought it could have been an amazing movie, but it dropped the ball on having way too many loose ends, even some that should have been obviously tied off, and then just doing shocking things just for shock's sake to try and be as edgy as possible. And ultimately, those two things just made the movie fall apart. But with Weapons, I kind of feel like the marketing campaign was very similar to Long Legs. It was an amazing marketing campaign, but the movie really stuck the landing for me. And are there a couple loose ends at the end of this film? Yes. Is it as many as Long Legs? Absolutely not. And I felt what few loose ends there were, the movie was, for the most part, satisfying in its completion. And so I was very happy with how this movie progressed over Long Legs. But like looking at the trailers, I would recommend you actually check them out because surprisingly, the trailers do not spoil that much. I mean, sure, after seeing the movie, a couple of flashes in the trailers, like, okay, that's of this thing. But if you're going in fresh, you would have no idea what any of these flashes have to do with the movie. And that was kind of the whole point of the experience, was not to spoil too much. Thankfully, the director or whoever was in charge of this movie was smart enough to get to the person who was making the trailer going, no, you're not going to spoil this movie in the trailer like 99% of every other movie out there that's ever been made. But I really appreciate that, and that was kind of the whole point of this movie, was there needs to be a mystery. You're not supposed to know what all is going on. You're supposed to go in to find out the mystery. If I was to tell you in as few words as possible what the ultimate thing was in this movie that caused this event to happen, you'd probably be like, really? That was it? Oh, okay. But trust me, it's not a disappointing revelation. It's just, it's kind of hard to, it's one of those things where on paper it doesn't sound great, but in execution it was. Probably one of my biggest criticisms of this film was the fact that it did tip its hand a little early at the halfway point. They were trying to leave like some clues and breadcrumbs similar to what the actual cause of this event was. And some of them, like in hindsight, I kind of get. It's like, okay, that kind of makes sense looking back. But there was one, they thought they were being clever, but it was just a little bit on the nose, and I kind of scoffed when I was in the theater because, like, okay, thanks, now I know it's pretty much this. And it was. I don't want to say exactly what it was because you know to look for it if you see this film. Just, you may be lucky enough to not notice it. I definitely noticed it when I saw it, and it's just like, I kind of wish you didn't have that little like, hey, it could be this here, because honestly I was a little disappointed in that. But like, the story, real quick, without getting into too much detail, is about this small town where one night every kid in one classroom at the local grade school at like 2:15 or 17 in the morning got up out of bed, ran out of their house into the dark of night, and was never seen of again. And the entire movie is about this town and certain characters in this town trying to figure out what happened, trying to come to terms with what happened, trying to, move on. And so the movie is told from different perspectives, and you'll see some scenes happen over again because you're seeing it from a second perspective. So character A, you'll see kind of their story to a certain point, and then character B, you'll see a scene that happened in character A's story that kind of intersects. And the more characters you start following, the more the story kind of starts unraveling more. In terms of like explaining it to you. And there were a few characters I was just like, why are we following this character? There's a very specific one, when you get there, you ask yourself the same question, like, do we really need to hear this character's story? But it did make sense in the end, and so I honestly didn't hate that aspect of it. But interesting enough, this made me want to watch the movie again, because there were certain characters that you saw real briefly in one of the earlier stories, and then in a later story they're like actually fully introduced, and you kind of like just want to go back and look at like, hey, was that the character we saw at this point? And so, it definitely is one of those movies I think will benefit, at least me, from watching again. And so I am looking forward to seeing it again. Now, I will say that surprisingly, this movie was very slow paced at times. It is over a 2-hour movie, but there were moments that it did not feel like a roller coaster ride, but it did kind of have a slow burn feel. And I didn't get that from the trailers. The trailers kind of hinted that this was going to be a roller coaster ride. But another thing that the trailers hinted at that surprised me, I thought this was going to be like just a straight up full blown horror film. And interesting enough, this is not a horror film outside of the really graphic scene I told you about earlier in the film. This is more of like a drama / thriller. There's very few horror elements in this film. They are there, and there are horror elements in this film, but this is far more a drama / thriller than it is a horror film. Another thing I really appreciated was there was a lot of very creative camera work in this film, especially with this one convenience store that they were filming in. They did some really, I would say they did some of the best camera work in this small, for lack of a better term, the quickie mart, okay? And in terms of the acting, everyone does a fantastic job. Julie Garner, she was in Fantastic Four, and honestly, kind of forgettable in that movie. But in this movie, she kills it as the teacher of the small classroom, and she does a really good job, just looking like someone who is just broken at times, someone who's unhinged, coming off the rails, and you definitely believe it with this character. Josh Brolin also does another fantastic job. I mean, he usually does a good job in his movies, regardless if it's a good movie or not. But the one who stole the spotlight was Amy Madigan. I can't tell you what character she played in this movie without spoiling anything, but oh my gosh, she steals the show from everyone else. And as great of a job as everyone does in this film, she is the standout in this film. And I would say this is easily one of her best roles, if not her best role she has ever done. And yes, I have seen Field of Dreams. I have seen Gone Baby Gone. I have seen other movies that she has been in. And this might very well be one of her best roles of her entire career. She killed it in this movie. But honestly, in the end, Weapons was a damn fine film. I absolutely enjoyed this. It kept me fascinated till the end. Honestly, there were some plot holes, like threads that weren't fully completed, but unlike Law Lakes, I did not have a million questions. It was just like 2 or 3 questions, but overall they do explain stuff, and it does have kind of a nice ending to the film in terms of just all the story elements that needed to be tied off. So yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was fantastic, and it's one of the best movies of this year. So yeah, anyway, that's been my review of Weapons. What did you guys think? Say off in the comments down below. My name is Chris Carl from Lemon Reviews, and that will be all for today.